Well, hello and welcome to the Movie Paradise. I am your host, Nathanael Molnár, and this is Movie Night Tonight. Every single week, we discuss a new film in depth, with each month having a new theme. We are currently in the month of November, and this month's theme is action sci-fi films, and the movie we are discussing tonight is James Cameron's 1986 film, Aliens. I'm, of course, your host, Nathanael Molnár. I'm joined by a great panel today. I have Matt Smith.
Hello.
And Connor Murphy.
Hi.
So, if you didn't know, this is a full spoiler discussion, so if you've not seen Aliens, you may want to tune out of this discussion, watch the film, and then come back later and listen to this once you have seen the movie, because we're going full spoilers in on this film. And so I'd like to go real quick around our panel and just say briefly what our first impressions are of the film and roughly how many times we've seen it, starting with Matt.
So this was the first time I saw Aliens, seeing Alien, I want to say like 3 or 4 years ago. Overall, I really liked it. I like it as a sequel. I think it not so much adds to the first one, but like is a very good successor to it. And like if you liked Alien, it just, here's more stuff you'll also like. So I think that's sort of just how I thought about it.
Yeah. Connor?
I liked it a lot. I think that it was a slightly less withholding version of Alien, which is, I think, why it's often billed as an action movie instead of a horror movie. And for me, pretty much I feel like I liked the first one more by a little bit. They did almost the same thing in terms of like getting the same message and feeling across. I liked the first one more a little bit just because you knew a little bit less about what to expect, and I don't know. I tend to have a bias against action movies and a bias against sequels, and I think both of those things are the reason that I like the first one more, but I think as far as those two things go, this is a good movie.
And this was your first time watching it?
Yep, this was my first time seeing it, and first time I watched Alien was on your show 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, so last month was horror movies, and our second movie of the month was Alien. So if you're curious at all about our thoughts, Connor and I did the discussion of Alien. I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot about the first Alien movie in comparison to Aliens. So feel free, that's up on the site. You can go at Movie Night TNT, and you can find Alien there on the site. So for me, my first impressions, I've seen this movie, I can't even tell you how many times I've seen this. I can't put a number to it. I've seen it so many times. This is in my top 10 all-time favorite films. I love this movie. And so I just think it's brilliant filmmaking. I say it nudges out the first Alien just slightly. I think both films, they're very different. They're very similar, but also very different. And I think they do different things and they accomplish different things. And I think they both work for different reasons. But I would say Aliens just slightly knocks out Alien for me. So let's get right into this discussion of talking about Alien and Aliens. And I think the film, it's people are very quick to say, oh, Alien is sci-fi horror, Aliens is action horror, or action sci-fi. And I think that's a fair assessment. But I think part of what makes Aliens as good as it is that there is an element of horror.
Definitely.
And I want to get more into that, because I think that's one of the reasons why Aliens works as well as it is, because it has a very strong horror element. But going back to this comparison of Alien and Aliens, they're very different films, but they're also, you can tell that they're from the same franchise. You know, they feel in their DNA, they feel the same still, even though tonally they are drastically different. So I wanted to open this up with comparing and contrasting Alien and Aliens, starting with Connor.
I find that the core similarity is that they're both movies about human survival in the face of this horrible, I want to say predator. There's a movie called Predator, so I have to tread lightly, but this is a predatorial alien. It's like the perfect hunter, and they're just kind of surviving that.
Yeah.
It's almost like the most dangerous game in that respect. And because they both have that core idea of human survival, I think that's what makes them the same. And then the but different part is just because Aliens treats it with a lot less restraint. It becomes a lot more of an action movie. They have a decent knowledge of what is coming for them. But I find that even though they have a decent knowledge of what's coming for them, they don't know where it's going to come from, when it's going to come. So it's, the horror element comes from the fact that there's so much still unknown to them.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you know a lot about what the xenomorphs are, which I think that's why I prefer Alien a little bit more, because you know even less about it, and that makes it, you're really on board with where the characters are. In Aliens, all the characters are on different levels of understanding, and that takes something away from it for me a little bit, but you still have that, and this is the horror element, you still have that lack of knowledge about where it's coming from, when it's coming. Mm-hmm. And so you can still be surprised. You can still be scared.
Yeah. I'd say with Aliens, it's you said that the characters have different levels of understanding of what's going on. And I think, Ripley probably aside, I think Burke understands to an extent what's going on, more so than the Colonial Marines. Mm-hmm. Ripley is the one who understands the most what is going on. But I think what makes Aliens different from Alien is that the Colonial Marines, they're driven by ignorance and naivete. They are completely ignorant as to what's going on. They're like, oh yeah, we're the best. We're the most badass people you could possibly find. We're gonna go in and just another bug hunt, gonna exterminate these creatures. And then as soon as they get in there, they realize that they were not prepared for this at all. With Alien, they're not naive as to what's going on. They're just completely unprepared. Mm-hmm. They're not warriors. I think this is where we have the biggest distinction between Alien and Aliens, is that the characters in Alien, they're what's the word I want to look for? They're pioneers almost. Mm. Like you have researchers and scientists and people who are going on explorers. They're going on expeditions. Whereas with Aliens, you have Marines and soldiers and warriors. And so the way that the threat hits them and the way they interpret it is completely different. Yeah. Because in Alien, it's more, we're not prepared for this. We're not soldiers. We're not warriors. And Ripley even says in the beginning of Aliens, she says, I'm not a soldier. Yeah. I was never prepared to fight. I was never trained for this. And so her crew in Alien is completely wiped out. And then we get to Aliens, and they are prepared, but they're driven by ignorance. Yeah. And then they're almost completely exterminated themselves. I
had said when we watched Alien that I felt like it was sort of a thriller / mystery that turns into horror. Mm-hmm. I think that this has a very similar shift just from action to horror.
I would say that there's less action in this, or the action is different than what we normally consider action.
Definitely.
Because I think when we talk about action in action movies, the action is thrilling and it's exciting and it's visceral. And it's all about like, oh, that was a really awesome punch, and oh, that was so cool the way that happened. With Aliens, the action is horror driven, if that makes sense. It's not so much like a light-hearted, weightless action film, but more about survival.
Yeah, the violence is very heavy. It's not.
Yeah, it's not action for thrilling action. It's action. It's hard to even qualify. It is action, but it's hard to qualify as action because it's not necessarily coming from a place of what we traditionally understand action to be. Yeah. It is coming from a place of horror. And I think that's how Aliens so graciously bridges the gap tonally between Alien and Aliens.
Yeah. I think you could say the same thing about Predator, which was last week's movie. Mm-hmm. And as you have said, that Predator is very heavily inspired by Aliens. I feel like they're both almost equal parts horror and action. And the action comes from survival rather than, like you said, thrilling fights.
I would say Aliens more so than Predator.
Yeah,
I completely agree, but I think there's far more of a prominence in the horror in Aliens than I would say Predator. Because Predator is there's definitely elements of horror in it, but I think it's more so in the DNA of Aliens than Predator.
I agree.
So then I think that's a perfect transition into talking about the horror of Aliens, because I think the horror element of Aliens is what makes it, for me personally, what makes it as great as it is, and how James Cameron utilizes the horror. I think some of the most, now granted, these were elements in Alien, but were, I think, utilized so much more effectively in Aliens than they were in Alien, specifically the motion trackers. Because we saw one brief scene of it in Alien with, I think it was Kane had the motion tracker, and that was it. But with in Aliens, they all have the motion trackers, and that's where we get the biggest sense of horror. Because you hear the beep of the motion tracker, and you look at the screen, the display screen, and you see something is coming. You have no idea what. I think the biggest scene of this is near the end of the film, where they are boarded up in their room, and they're like, okay, they're 15 feet, 14, 13, 12. Okay, they're in the room, 9. And they keep counting down, and they're like, okay, where are these things? You don't see them. You just hear the motion tracker.
Yeah.
And so much is... there's so much intensity and horror built just from that one device.
Yeah.
And I just think it was utilized so perfectly and so effectively in the film.
I want to point out, I think that it's kind of funny, like in Alien, you see the motion tracker, there's one thing, and you know, it's you don't know what that one thing is, and you're scared about what that one thing's going to be. And then in Aliens, that happens once, and it turns out to be a gerbil. And it's like, it's almost like the movie itself is poking fun at, like, oh, you thought one thing was going to be scary, and then like 5 minutes later you see 200.
Hundreds. And that's another, like, just from a filmmaking point of view, that's such a great way to show that there are hundreds and hundreds of these things without actually physically showing all of them.
Yeah.
You can communicate that there are all these countless creatures without actually having to build, 200 costumes for them to be all in the film.
I personally, I felt like that scene was sort of a nod to the first movie, and I feel like it was playing with your expectations having seen the first movie.
The gerbil thing?
Yeah, the gerbil. Just like, you're like, oh, here it is again, the same thing that happened in the first movie, where there's a thing coming towards them. But it just ended up being a gerbil, and I feel like that was, the filmmakers laughing at you, like, haha, one thing.
Yeah. Because there's a definite reason why the title is plural.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of aliens in this. And this is something that I was curious how you, Connor, would take this. Because I think a part of the reason why Alien is as effective as it is because it's one creature wiping out so many people. And in Aliens, we have a lot of creatures, and they're wiped out very easily. There are many where it's in Alien, it's so hard to kill this one creature. And so there's this big emotional catharsis at the end when they do kill the one creature. And then in Aliens, they just have a machine gun and they wipe out like 10 of them at once. Does that lessen the fact that there are so many aliens in this movie? Does that lessen it for you?
Definitely a little bit. Not to the extent that I thought it would. Because I knew the movie had more than one, and that I was worried about it going in. But it wasn't what I thought it was going to be in terms of that. I feel like it would have been hard for them to make this a battle for survival. I feel like the first one they were running and hiding for their survival. In this case, they were battling for it. And I think it would have been hard to do that with just one.
Yeah.
Because, how many times can you say the bullets just like ricochet off of it?
Yeah.
You kind of have to give them some they have to be able to gain something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's how they solved that problem.
Yeah.
That's also kind of what the queen is for at the end, is to sort of supplement that, because she becomes the one that seems almost impossible to kill, and it takes how many times do you think she's dead before she's back?
Yeah, and you even have at the very end the shot of the alien going out the air duct or whatever, and in space as at the very end of the film, very much mirroring, if not exactly mirroring, the first movie.
I had that sort of felt a little bit to me like, oh, they're building another Death Star kind of a thing.
Yeah, you know what? I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah,
I think other than that one shot, I wouldn't say that applied, but the fact that they had that one shot that so completely mirrored the first one, I know what you mean.
There were a couple of beats in the movie that kind of lined up with that, but for the most part, it wasn't an issue. I'm seeing it more just like that one shot, like you said, made me more aware of it, but I see more of it in the movie now, but it didn't affect my first watch at all until that shot.
Yeah. I would say where we have seen with subsequent Alien movies has been going back to the formula of the first one, which is a brand new crew encounters the xenomorphs and are slowly wiped out. We saw that in Prometheus, although it wasn't the xenomorph, it was something else, but we saw in Prometheus, we saw that in Alien Covenant. What I love about Aliens is that it's a brand new story, and the story feels warranted. You know, I think a lot of the times when we see sequels to originals that are so good, the question we often ask ourselves is there a reason for this story to be told? Is there a reason to go back to the well and come up with another story, another version of what is going on in this universe? And I think Aliens gives us a very good reason of why there should be another story within this world, why there is a continuation. And I think it sets it up so perfectly in the first act. We have Ripley waking up from a 57-year sleep, which already makes it so much more interesting because there's so much more complexity there than rather than like, oh, it's the day after the first movie.
Yeah.
The fact that there's been 57 years and she has been in this like cryo sleep or hypersleep or whatever throughout the whole time. And then you have that scene where she, in the extended version, of course, where she finds out that her daughter died. And that she completely missed out. I think she said, what was it, that she left on her daughter's like 12th birthday or something?
Yeah, she said, I promised her I'd be back for her birthday, her 11th birthday.
Yeah, which, not very coincidentally, is about the same age Newt is, which I think was perfect and done for a very specific reason.
Yeah, I think I have mixed feelings about that scene because I feel like that scene itself was somehow lacking in impact. I don't know. There was something off about it to me. I feel like that parallel is important for her relationship with Newt. Is that not in the theatrical release?
That's not in the theatrical. And that's one of the...
no mention of her daughter?
No mention.
See, I feel like they should.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is absolutely crucial to understanding why Ripley has such a connection with Newt.
It's an important storyline in the movie.
Yeah.
But that scene I felt was a little bit strange.
Yeah.
There were a few things about that scene. It felt sudden. It felt, I don't know, the fact that she looks at a picture of her and like touches this old woman that she's never seen before, and it's like, I don't know. It felt off to me, and so I see why they cut it, but I think that they could have somehow worked in a mention of her daughter. I don't know.
Yeah, I just think that one scene is so crucial, not just in understanding Ripley's relationship with Newt, but also Ripley as a larger character, because it gives so much more depth to her character, because understanding that she is a mother, and that and it brings it home so much when you have Ripley going up against the alien queen, because then there are parallels between the two. And it's a battle between mothers, and it allows for Ripley to kind of understand more where the alien queen is coming from.
Yeah,
and I think personally, understanding that Ripley herself is a mother gives so much more weight to the scene where Ripley decides to burn all the eggs at the end of the movie, and then also understanding Ripley as a mother gives more weight and emotion to the alien queen, like thrashing around and crying almost in pain that her children are all being wiped out and annihilated and destroyed.
Yeah.
I just think it is such a... Maybe the scene isn't the best in of itself when Ripley learns about the death of her daughter or whatever.
But it's an important idea through the
It
film.
is so important, and I think so much richness and complexity and depth to the film and to the character Ripley and to the alien queen and to Newt and all these moving parts in the film.
Yeah.
So much of that complexity is lost when you don't have that understanding and that realization.
Yeah, one of the strongest parts of the end of the film was, I felt, when Ripley is, in seeing the alien queen for the first time, and she, like, fires off a warning shot almost and says, like, I don't want to hurt you, I'm going to back off now.
Mm-hmm.
And, for a second there, I really thought that was going to work out. And so I feel like I could see, like, the gears turning in her head, like, this is a mother. I want to,
Yeah.
And so that scene definitely, and even like you have that scene, she is a mother, she looks at Newt, she looks at the queen, and then she decides, I have to do this anyway. And that just probably wouldn't translate if you don't have this moment of her realizing that her daughter, that she missed her whole daughter's life.
Yeah, I think that just adds so much richness to Ripley, understanding that.
Yep.
And I think one of the big parts of why this movie works is because the character of Ripley is such a well-written character, and Sigourney Weaver plays her brilliantly. Sigourney Weaver was nominated for Best Lead Actress for this role, which is weird to think about, like, a science fiction genre film is getting, of all things, an acting nomination, but it's so well-deserved because Sigourney Weaver is fantastic. I think specifically probably one of the best scenes of where we get Sigourney Weaver's just pure acting abilities is the boardroom briefing right after she came out of her sleep, and you have like all the corporate overlords are around the briefing table, and they're like, explain to me why you destroyed billions of dollars worth of a ship, and she's having to plead her case, and she says, like, all these things that you thought were so important, you can kiss all that goodbye if these aliens get out there and start infecting people. And I think that scene is where we really see Sigourney Weaver's acting abilities and just the passion and the drive and the anger and all these emotions of the character, because knowing the events of the first film and how traumatic that is for Ripley, we see a bunch of scenes of Ripley, waking up at the middle of the night, sweating and terrified. We see a lot of moments, even though she has her moments where she's fierce and standing up to the aliens, like at the very end of the film, we also have lots of moments where she's traumatized. And even go to the scene after the very first battle between the Colonial Marines and the aliens, and she's driving the cruiser or whatever, and she's just going, and someone has to say, okay, we're clear, you can stop now. We're gone, like we're past that. She has these moments of vulnerability and trauma that you can very clearly tell that what happened in the first movie like really deeply affected her. But it's balanced with these moments of where she is fierce and is a warrior and comes into her own as a soldier by the end of the film. And I think her character arc is one of the best parts of the film.
I think that her character arc, especially when you look at it contrasted against Burke and the way that Burke just slowly chips away as like a part of the team, I felt like that was a very, very good, I don't know, something about that dynamic there really, really felt strong to me, and I felt like Burke, whoever played Burke,
Paul Reiser.
Paul Reiser played Burke very well.
Oh yeah, I
think that
Burke.
He chipped his willpower was just like slowly falling away through the whole movie, and he did it so well.
I think Burke is just like, I don't know, he just plays that role so perfectly. Backstabbing, traitorous, you can't trust anything he comes out of his mouth. He's con man. I think Burke is, what's interesting is that I think the character Burke almost takes on the purpose of Ash in the first movie.
Definitely.
and I think there's a little bit of misdirection.
For those who don't know the first movie, right off the top of their head, Ash is the android, the synthetic of the first movie.
Artificial human, as they prefer to be called, we found out.
Well, Ash probably didn't. That was 57 years ago.
Yeah. So I think Burke takes on the role of Ash, but there is a bit of misdirection because you also have another synthetic on board, Bishop, who almost immediately you have conflict between Ripley and Bishop. Yeah. And I think it was really good misdirection.
Yeah.
That you're kind of expecting the whole movie, you're expecting Bishop to be the bad guy. Yeah. And then it turns out to be Burke.
Some good dramatic irony in that first scene where she says, "You brought an android," and Burke is, saying, "Oh, I didn't even think about that. I forgot." And he has to explain how she was betrayed the last time to Bishop, who's, who doesn't do that this time. Yeah. And he does.
The conflict wasn't even really between Ripley and Bishop. It was just Ripley.
Yeah.
Bishop just had no idea what was going on or why. He was just good the entire time.
He's like, okay, sorry.
Well,
I'll get out of your way then.
Like, okay, sorry.
I think that works so well is because when you have that scene in the cafeteria where Ripley learns that Bishop is a synthetic and then says, "Stay away from me, Bishop," you think that is being set up so that you think it's being set up that Bishop is going to betray her later in the film. You almost just immediately assume that's where it's going to go. And then there are moments where Bishop could betray them, and you see that he proves his loyalty and he proves that he is actually one of the good guys. And I think those moments hit home the most, like when he saves them at the last second at the very end of the film, and then ultimately when he's torn in half by the alien queen, that there's more emotion to that because you know that he's really one of the good guys.
And also, he still manages to save her while only half a bishop.
Yes.
It's pretty good.
I also want to point out that this has a happy ending, so it can't be a horror movie, and that's why nobody calls it a horror movie.
Although I will never forgive Alien 3 for their beginning.
I don't want to know. If it's not happy, if it doesn't let everybody be.
Are there 3 times as many aliens, or is there no aliens?
It's hard to say because
is there negative aliens?
The big problem with Alien 3 is its first 5 minutes. But I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah. Is it a whole crew of aliens running in from one human?
Yes, that is the plot of the film.
Okay, that makes sense.
Well, I was going to say, I would love to see these. Have you heard of a story clock before?
I don't think so.
It's this idea that you can plot a movie on a clock and see like the midpoint and the quarters of the film and see like parallels, lines drawn through it, like connecting points. And there's a lot of like theories of like if you make a triangle like connecting 3 points on the clock, it makes like a strong bringing back the same idea 3 times.
Oh, I am sure that there's a ton of that in Aliens.
But I was just thinking about that, and I'd love to see Aliens' story clock versus Aliens' story clock.
Alien and Aliens.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I was just thinking about, first of all, something is discovered and brought onto the ship. Happens in both. Mm-hmm. Second of all, there's a cafeteria scene that happens pretty close after, where it seems like, everything's okay, and then tensions are brought up. I've noticed a few parallels like that. Like, it felt almost like they got to their like last stand, like locking themselves in a room, kind of a thing, almost at the same time and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think these 2 movies follow a lot of the same beats, just with different, things.
Yeah, and I think that's why it works so well.
Yeah.
And that it would be easy because this is more action-oriented, more so than horror-oriented like the first film, it would be very easy for the 2 to feel jarring in terms of their tone. But they do feel so similar. Yeah. And I think it's because they have these narrative connections without it straight up just copying the formula of the first film.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I think we have to attribute so much to James Cameron for this film. Because I think he did about as perfect of a job as you can in living up to the monumental success of the first film and doing something familiar but also completely different and making it its own thing. we have to keep in mind the context of when this film came out. So the first one, Alien, came out in 79, and this one came out in 86. So there was about 7 years in between.
Wow.
So that is enough time for people to be set on Alien as a classic. You know, you can't touch Alien, you can't do anything with Alien. And then this kid, James Cameron, who had really not done much before. I think Terminator. He did Terminator. He wasn't James Cameron at the time that he did Aliens. He was a kid still.
He was Jim Cameron. He introduced himself before the extended edition as, "Hi, I'm Jim Cameron, and here's my cut. This is the way I want you to see it." He
goes by Jim Cameron in person, I believe.
Oh, it was just really funny seeing like this like 30-year-old guy be like, "Hey guys, I made a movie, and this is the way I want you to see it. It's better than the theatrical release."
Yeah, but he's this kid doing a sequel to a movie that's regarded as a classic, and so you can imagine the amount of pressure that is put on him. And then I think there's so much that has to be said about James Cameron and what he did with this film. Going back a little bit, we talked about Burke, we talked about Newt. I think one of the biggest supporting characters of this film, and one of the reasons why it has the tonal levity that it has, but it's that adds the fun to it, but is also just a crucial character, is Hudson.
Oh, definitely.
Played brilliantly by Bill Paxton, the late Bill Paxton. I think Hudson is just straight up one of the greatest characters in this film. I think he's brilliant. I think they use him effectively. On paper, this character could have been so annoying.
Yeah.
He could have been the character that they keep cutting back to, and we as the audience go, "Why do you keep cutting to this guy? Move on. This character, all he's doing is complaining and whining, and we don't need to see this. He's just eating up screen time."
Guys, what are we going to do?
Game over, man. Game over.
What are we going to do with our aliens, guys? What are we going to do?
But
I
Bill
love
Paxton,
Game Over, man.
Yeah,
I love that.
One of the great movie lines of all time.
Yeah.
Bill Paxton, the way Bill Paxton plays a character is that he walks that line of being annoying, but it works.
Yeah.
And it works so well, and he adds so much to this movie. And I think it's because he is probably, out of all of them, maybe Vasquez excluded, he's one of the most naive of them. One of the most ignorant. He was like, "Yeah, I'm like the tough guy. I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna kick all this kind of ass." And then as soon as everything starts to happen, he immediately melts.
Yeah.
And is just this kind of like, "What are we gonna do? There's no hope. There's no survival. I'm gonna die. What's gonna go on?"
Oh, geez, Scoop.
Essentially.
Very shaggy at the end.
So I think James Cameron knows when to use him, when to cut to him. And I think one thing that really stood out to me, and I'm sure Matt can attest to this, is the editing of the film. And that's something that really stood out to me when we watched it last night, was just how well edited this film was. And I think James Cameron knew specifically when it was the opportune time to cut to someone like Hudson, who would add these lines that would add these moments of levity, because they're funny lines, but at the same time adds to the horror and the sense of despair, and we have no idea what's going on and what we can do.
Yeah, he could have totally killed the pacing at any time when he got to Hudson. It could have taken the movie just to a complete stop, but it doesn't. They just hear him, they brush him off, and it keeps going. It just flows as you would expect it to.
Yeah.
When it could just be like, okay, here's Hudson time, guys. Enjoy it.
Yeah.
Now let's get back to the movie. But it's nothing like that.
He's a perfectly complementary character to the film.
Definitely.
So I think Hudson is just probably the strongest, greatest supporting character in this film. I think Burke is almost equally as great of a supporting character. Newt, I think, is fantastic. I love Newt. Now, I think a lot of people would probably say before they see Aliens, "What, you're gonna put an 80-year-old, not an 80-year-old, 8-year-old girl in an Aliens movie? Really? That's gonna kill the movie." But it works so well.
It does work, yeah.
Because there's a realness to it. It makes you realize that it adds to the horror of it, because you're now thinking of it in terms of there's an 8 or 9-year-old girl in the midst of all this carnage that's going on, and how traumatizing and terrifying that must be. And she does have those moments of being scared, but also she has this kind of stoicism to her that she's able to survive it all. And I think that's a point Ripley makes at some point in the film, is she says, this little girl was able to survive for so long here without any weapons and any training. And I think that gives a lot to the character Newt. Definitely.
This is not super related to Newt, although it's a thing that happens with Newt. I did feel a little bit like they don't actually kill people; they just like use them as hosts for their babies or something, like whatever.
Cocoon them?
Yeah, cocoon them. That felt a little bit like it was out of nowhere. I know that there were like hints at that, but they definitely killed people a few times.
Oh, well, I think they definitely killed people.
It feels like half the time they killed people and half the time they took them to use as hosts.
Yeah.
Well, then they died after.
Yeah, and then they died after.
So they're still killing everybody.
Yeah, but it just felt weird. I don't know.
Well,
the fact that she was like, they don't kill people. Like,
well, I don't think she said that. I think what they were referring to was that they were saying the people that they thought were dead after the, in terms of context to the film, this is the first fight between the colonial marines and the aliens, where they just barely got out of there alive, and then they look and see, because they have, the camera footage from each person, and they have the heart rate monitors, and so I think they looked and they saw that a couple of people who they left behind were still alive. And I think it was Vasquez said, "Oh, they're still alive. We gotta go back." And and Ripley was saying, there's no point. They're already being cocooned. So I think it wasn't so much that the aliens don't kill. Mm-hmm. It's that anyone who was left alive is pretty much already dead.
Yeah.
Essentially, even if they were left alive, they're essentially already.
But there
dead.
is Ripley, when she saw that Newt got taken, she said she's still alive, and I felt like that was a weird assumption, and I wasn't on board
I think she
with
was
it.
telling Hicks, because I think she thought that Hicks's first assumption would be Newt is dead, therefore we don't have to go after her.
Maybe.
Yeah, it was also I don't think she actually knew she was still alive. She said she felt she was still alive.
Maybe.
It was just like a hope thing.
And I don't know.
Or maybe
even trying to convince herself she's still alive.
Or maybe she was like, okay, chances are you're going to use her for, well, as a host. Mm-hmm. There's probably still time before.
Yeah.
Because they had to bring her back and tie her weird alien surround her up, and then wait for one of the things to hatch to attack her. It was probably just a hope thing the whole time.
Yeah.
This is the one possibility in which she's still alive, and I'm just gonna roll with it because that's who she is.
Yeah. It felt a little weird to me. When she was like, "I think Newt's still alive," I was like, I don't know if that's likely, and it just felt a little bit weird to me. I think they could have had her line. It was even just one line, I think, but they could have had her reaction there just come off as a little bit more like, I hope Newt's still alive, and I'll do anything if I can get her back at all. So I feel like that would have translated a little bit better than... and her line was pretty close to, they don't kill them, they just cocoon them, or something like that.
No, that's not exactly what she said.
But it was close to that.
Well, no, I know because she didn't say something about they don't kill them, they cocoon them. She didn't say that when Newt went missing at that point.
But she said something like that. Newt's not dead.
Well, she said to Hicks, she's not dead. That's all she said.
Well, I think that was just...
And then Hicks said, I know, we can get her back. And so that's why I think it was Ripley telling Hicks... Because
he says yeah, I believe you, but we got to go right now.
Yeah, that's what Hicks said. So
and then they switch gears. She gets Hicks to the ship or whatever, and then she's like, okay, now I'm going back.
Yeah, because I think Ripley was under the assumption that Hicks was going to say she's gone, forget about her, we got to go. Mm-hmm. And then Ripley was saying she's not dead, we can still save her or whatever. She's not dead.
Yeah, I also don't think Ripley would have even left, even if she didn't believe. She wouldn't want to know that there was a chance that Newt was still alive, and she didn't go back and check at least. So I don't think she ever really totally believed that
Yeah.
Maybe even herself.
I
if
think
she was there.
Ripley, if Hicks wasn't there, Ripley's next thing was going to be to jump down there
Yeah, oh, yeah.
and start looking for Newt. So I think it was more, and maybe it might have even been that Hicks started to like push her, like nudge her that we got to get going, and she said she's still alive, and then Hicks said,
Yeah.
"I know, I believe you. We just got to go now."
Yeah, but he said, if he hadn't said that, I don't know if she would have went with him.
Yeah, I think she would have just jumped right down there and started looking.
I agree with that.
So, we've been talking about this. Oh, I know we've mentioned a few times this the initial fight between the Colonial Marines and the aliens, and I think this is one of the best scenes in the movie. And I love, and it was something I was paying attention to when we were watching it last night, was how this whole scene was shot. And so, to give a little bit of lead-in into this scene, they have just arrived on LV-426, the planet, and they've gone through the base where all the humans had been living for all these years, and it's completely deserted, and it's clear that something has happened, but they don't know what's happened. We have a sense as the audience of what happened because we saw the last movie. Hopefully we all saw the last movie. But so we know what happened, but the characters are starting to figure out exactly what happened. And so they find out that they're under like the fusion reactor or whatever. And so if you have the gunfire, it's going to set that off. And I love that added little detail. Because then Apone goes around and collects all the magazines. And then you have Vasquez and, I forget the other character that she was with for most of the movie. I forget his name. But they secretly keep theirs.
Yeah,
and
the blonde guy.
Yeah, and that might have been Frost. I don't remember. But that adds that adds to their characters. And that because they're like, oh, I'm not going to listen to orders.
Yeah.
This is BS. And it also adds to the carnage during the scene because suddenly you have guns going off and they're like wait, who's firing guns? Because then there's this added level of suspense of, is the fusion reactor going to go off? But you have this battle go off between them, and it works so well because it's not an action fight. It's not action. It's all horror.
Yeah, it's survival.
Exactly. Because the Marines have no idea what they're getting themselves in for. The briefing meeting where Ripley tells them what happened to her, what she went through in the first film, they completely just write it off. They're making jokes through the whole thing. You have the sergeant or whatever telling them, listen to the thing on disc. I guarantee you not a single one of them listened to it.
Yeah.
And so they just think, oh yeah, this is gonna be a piece of cake. We're gonna walk in there. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be like an action movie.
Yeah.
It's gonna be fun. We're just gonna go in there, shoot up some aliens and do all this great stuff. And then they get there and they very quickly realize that that's not the case.
That actually, the way that you said that made me feel like it's almost like the Marines are an action movie and Ripley and the aliens are a horror movie, and it's like the conflict between those two ideas.
Yeah, I think that might have been what James Cameron was going for, because that is the feel you have, and I think that's especially with the banter between all the Marines, and I think that's one of the best parts about the Marines is just their banter and their back and forth and their quips and what you can understand about their characters just from what they're saying and their dynamics, and then how that all immediately dissipates as soon as they encounter the aliens, and then it becomes a horror movie.
Yeah.
And you don't see too many actual aliens in that whole scene. I was paying attention. Most of it is, even when stuff really starts to happen and you have all the aliens coming out and there's just complete pandemonium as to what is actually going on, they're not even using a lot of shots from within the actual scene. A lot of it at that point is in the control room with Ripley and Burke and the sergeant or whoever is in charge of the mission, who'd only been on 38 simulated, 2 in real life, including that one, which is a dumb idea to put him in charge if he's only been in 2 for a mission like this. Anywho.
Well, it shows, it's an added detail to say that they're not taking this seriously.
Yeah.
They put a group of Marines that wouldn't take it seriously. They gave them a leader that wouldn't take it seriously.
Exactly.
Although also makes me wonder, maybe this is a misunderstanding on my part of military things, but who's Apone if that guy's like the lieutenant?
He might have been the general or something. And maybe the qualifications or whatever are different because this is the future. This is like
Space Force.
This is like 2070s. Yeah, this is Space Force.
He definitely
he's like the ground sort of in the moment commander.
He's the director.
He's the
and
one.
The lieutenant's the producer.
More or less, he's the one with all the experience. He's the one leading them in the actual field, while the other guy's just behind the screen, basically.
Yeah. But in that fight, most of it is in that control room, and they're watching the camera footage on their helmets, and then you just hear screaming and gunfire, and they're like, "Where's the gunfire coming from?" and all this chaos.
Yeah.
And I think that scene is so crucial because no character is the same after that scene, because I think that scene is like an hour into the movie or something like that. So you have all this buildup of seeing the Colonial Marines are like the baddest of the bad, and they're all these macho people, and then they go in there and they're completely eviscerated, and those who make it out alive are completely changed.
Yeah.
That's when Hudson's faith completely shatters, and he's like, "There's no hope. We're all gonna die."
It's almost their real briefing. Like they don't take the briefing seriously, and then they learn.
Yeah, it's that moment where they snap out of their macho-ness, and they're in reality, and they realize this is not at all what we thought it was going to be.
It's really satisfying because one of the most frustrating parts of the first movie is that no one is listening to Ripley or taking her seriously, because they didn't. And I guess they didn't watch the first movie. So when people actually start dying and you see aliens, they're like, you had the opportunity to be warned. You could have known what you were going in for, but you decided not to.
Yeah.
So you deserve it in a little bit of a way. It's like, next time you'll listen. Next time they're in with Mission Brief, they're gonna sit there and they're gonna listen. They're gonna take notes.
Yeah, it's almost a satisfying scene because it's vindication for Ripley. You're like, it's exactly like, it's almost an "I told you so" moment where these people who are so ignorant and naive as to what's going on, they get their comeuppance, and but it's so effective because the scene works on so many different levels. It's almost like it's a close to the first act. In many ways, it's this big emotional scene where it changes all the characters. It really is the biggest showcase of the horror and the action, and it's just one of the most fundamental scenes of the film. And I think it works as well. The film as a whole works so well because of that one scene and what that one scene sets up for the rest of the film.
I'd love to count the number of Ripley "I told you so" moments in this movie.
There are a lot.
There are at least 4 that I can think of off the top of my head.
And there are many great moments in this movie. There's so many great scenes. Like I mentioned before, you have the scene with the motion tracker where they're saying like, okay, 5, 4, they're in the room. Where are they? They must be in the floors. No, they're in the ceiling.
They're all invisible. They're all predators. Alien versus Predator.
Essentially. When we were watching it last night, and I forget who it was, but whoever it was lifted up the ceiling panel.
I think it was Hicks.
To look in the ceiling, and he knew there's something in there. I've seen the movie countless times, and I was watching through my fingers.
Yeah.
Because of how well the tension in that scene was built. And then you see all these aliens, and you're like, I want to say words that I can't say on the air.
Yeah.
Like, oh.
There were so many, like, moments that I was watching through my fingers. Like, this is a very tense movie. It almost, I feel like you have like this dread when you're watching Alien, but when you're watching this movie, it's like, it turns from like I forget exactly, I've mentioned this on one of the horror shows, that there are like the 3 types, and it's terror, horror, and disgust. I think horror is like uncanny, and terror is like, you know what the thing is, and you know you should be scared of it. Like if there's a big hungry lion about to come
this
at
is
you.
more terror.
This is like in the first movie, you really have horror. You don't know what it is. You're worried that it's going to attack. In this movie, it's more like the big hungry lion type thing. Like,
and Alien 3 is discussed as to what they do to the franchise. But joke aside,
but when you see those aliens coming through the air vent, you're like, they're all dead. I know what that thing can do, and they're all going to die.
Yeah.
You're kind of like Hudson the whole time.
Essentially.
Yeah.
And that's why Hudson is kind of the point of view of the audience. What the audience wants to be saying in this moment. This movie works on so many levels. One of the best scenes of horror and tension in this movie, and this was another reason why I stress watching the extended cut, because this wasn't in the theatrical. The scene where they set up the gun turrets in the hall, and they're set to automatically go off with any motion, and all the characters are in the base, and all they can see are that the guns are firing, and they're going down and down and down, and they're still going, and they're still going, and they're still going. They're like, how many aliens are there? And then all the guns are out of ammo, and they're like, that's it. We're out. And we have no idea if we killed any of them.
Yeah.
And that scene is so well shot, so well edited, so well executed. And it's just, there are a lot of these scenes where you don't see what is going on, but something is telling you that there are a lot of these aliens.
Yeah.
And it just fills you with this dread. I think the motion tracker scenes, the scenes with those turrets, I think there's a lot of scenes like that, and I think that's just so effective. And it's the horror. It's the horror in this movie, and I think the horror element of this film is really what seals the deal and makes Aliens as great as it is, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, as we wrap up this discussion here, how about we go around and say what our final thoughts are on Aliens, starting with Matt Smith?
I think it's hard for me to say whether or not I prefer Alien or Aliens, because they're so similar. It really is that perspective shift instead of being like, watching people get into danger when you know what's going on versus just getting upset that no one's listening to Ripley the whole time. I think that's probably like the biggest difference between the two movies for me is just, am I watching it as an audience or am I watching Ripley watch everyone else? So I think I'm going to have to spend a little time to figure out which one I like more, probably watch Alien again. But I'll watch Aliens again too, why not? But yeah.
You can never go wrong with watching those movies.
But do you have that kind of time? Can you just kill 2.5 hours?
I got like 6 hours where I don't do anything. Yeah, sure.
It's the best 2.5 hours you're ever going to have in your life. So, Connor, final thoughts on Aliens?
Final thoughts on it. Do you want me to give a rating? I can do a rating.
If you would like.
Out of 5, I'd give it a 4. I don't go with like the 4.2, 4.3, that kind of thing that you do. I stick to, it's either 4 stars or 4.5 stars. So I'd give it a 4. It definitely, it's hard for me to say it's not like 4.2 because, this movie made me question that because it's a very good movie. I feel like I don't want to group it with some of the other 8s, 8 out of 10 or 4 out of 5 that I have. So part of me is like, is it more than that? But I don't think it's a 4.5 quite. I think I gave Alien a 4.5, so there's that. But I thought this was a very good movie. It did a lot of the things that Alien did well. It did them well in a different way. Conveyed a lot of the same ideas through different means. Put different characters through a similar thing, which is definitely has value to it. A little bit of me feels like it was the same movie twice, but there are a lot of reasons why that's not very true. But I definitely have part of my head is just nagging at me like this is just they built another Death Star. So I think that's where all of my negatives towards this film go. But I do think it's a very good film, and that's why I'd give it a 4.
Yeah, Aliens is one of my all-time favorites. I absolutely adore this movie. I've seen it so many countless times, and I'm going to probably forever love this film. I think it is just genius in its way that it is an action horror sci-fi film, and I think a lot of people overlook the horror element in this movie, and as I've said a couple of times on the show already, it's the horror element that makes it for me. I think all the characters are so well written. The dialogue, and I didn't even get to say this, I've mentioned I think I professed my love for James Cameron a few times on the show, but I absolutely love his dialogue. His dialogue is so rich, and quotable, and I just think it's great, and it gives different feels to the characters, and it just adds so much to each individual character, and the dialogue is written specific for those characters to emulate how they act in the situations. It's genius writing. I adore this film. I love it. I stray from trying to do scores on this show because it's more discussion oriented as opposed to rating a film. But since you did a rating, I will give it, my rating is a 5 out of 5.
Wow.
There are very few films that I give 5 out of 5s. That's reserved for
improvement.
That's reserved for the movies in my top 10. But Aliens is in my top 10.
Is Alien in your top 10?
It's in my top 20.
Does it have a 5 out of 5?
No. It's a 4.5 out of 5.
Not even like a 4.7 or anything?
It might be a 4.6 or something like that, but it's around there. It's not a 5 out of 5.
Wow.
I had a big struggle as to whether I give Aliens 4.9 or if I give it a 5. But I give it the 5 because when I sat down to think about what would I change in Aliens, I couldn't think of anything. So there we have it. That is our discussion of the 1986 classic and perfect film, No Room for Improvement, 5 out of 5 film, Aliens. Once again, I am your host, Nathanael Molnár, and I'd like to thank my great panel for being here with me. Matt Smith, thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
And Connor Murphy, thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And next week, we will be continuing our discussion of action sci-fi films with my all-time favorite movie, The Matrix.
Reloaded.
Now, just a caution. Oh no, no. Just a caution to people. Next week's show will not be on the air as we will be going on Thanksgiving break. So the Matrix show will be recorded and posted exclusively to online. It will not be on the air, so make sure to keep your eye out for that Matrix discussion. You can go to our social medias at Movie Night TNT on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and there you can find a link to YouTube, to Spotify, to iTunes, and all of our shows are there. You can go and view all of them, and that's where the Matrix show will be. So thank you everyone for listening to Movie Night tonight, and until next time, see you later.